Welcome back. We're talking about recent economic reforms in India. You've just heard from a member of the opposition party in India's government, the Indian National Congress. To respond, we're joined by Subramanian Swamy, a leader in the ruling BJP party and a current member of India's parliament. Mr. Swamy is a long-time government official and political activist. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Yes, thank you.
Well, we've just heard from a member of the opposition, and he is very critical of these measures announced by the Prime Minister, saying that in the instances, these measures are okay, but they will be very difficult to implement. Not in culture, which is a very important sector in India, and that in many respects, the technology that foreign companies will be bringing to India is more suited to a Western economy, not to an Indian economy. To which you would say what?
Well, you see, the neglect of agriculture started when the Congress party under the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru and thereafter Indira Gandhi had adopted the Soviet economic model, which believed in extracting resources from agriculture to finance industrial development. And agriculture never had any resources because they were bled quite substantially during the 100 years of the British imperialist rule in India. And therefore, to say that the agriculture is declining because of the 2 years of the BJP rule is a bit ridiculous. Yes, I agree that agriculture requires much more focus than ever before. But it has also, it's a sector with a great deal of potential. With a little attention, like it happened briefly under what was called the Green Revolution, we became self-sufficient. Right now, I think the most important thing that we have to do for agriculture, and that is being given shape in form of a plan now, and that is to make it a exporting sector, because we still produce the cheapest agricultural products, and even milk and flowers, we produce it much cheaper than the rest of the world. So yes, we need to focus on agriculture. There's no doubt about that.
Well, let's look at some of the other specific measures that were announced by the Prime Minister. Let's take something like pharmaceuticals. Foreign investors would now be able to own 100% of a company in India. India is one of the biggest producers of generic drugs, for instance. What stops a foreign company, say a United States company, from coming into India, buying up a company that produces generic drugs and shutting down that company?
Well, I think, you know, at the moment the policy is that you come here and start production. And if it means that shutting down the already existing Indian companies or trying to buy them, I think there would be certainly the fine print, which has still not come out, it was obviously a policy document that has come out. And now the nitty-gritty will come out, and the U.S. Congress has got a large amount of testimony as to what the American companies want from India. I think the most important thing they want is intellectual property rights. And that, I think, Indian government will do it much better than, say, some other governments like China. So I think there should be no problem to work out in a way that the Indian domestic industry doesn't get destroyed.
What about the fact that foreign companies can now have a 100% stake in defense companies in India? Are there any national security implications for India with this measure?
Well, it's not. There cannot be much of a national security impact because most of the companies come with the government support. I mean, it's not possible for us, for example, to buy F-18 from the United States without the United States government sort of underwriting it, or the United States government getting certain guarantees from the Indian government. So even if they come here, they won't be freelancers in the sense they will be independent of their domestic government when they come here. I think this whole idea was to encourage people to make a wholesale transfer of technology and also be in a position to use India's skilled labor, which is very cheap and cheaper than China, to be able to export from India to neighboring countries which buy presently straight out of the United States, for example.
There was a report produced by the McKinsey consultancy in 2014 which showed that 680 million Indians, that's half the population, currently live in what the report said was deprivation in India. How do these new economic measures announced by the government help those people?
Well, I won't go into the quantitative aspects of these numbers. Of course, we have a large number of poor people. There's no question about it. But it has been consistently coming down in a very quite a rapid way. And there are questions of what measures you use. But going by the United Nations Millennium Development Statistics, I would say that India would probably not have more than 30% of its population below what we call as the irreducible minimum or the starvation rate. So there have been no starvation deaths in India. There have been no famines, whereas many other countries have had famines even while there have been development. India has not at all had one single famine after the British left India. So I would say, I would not say that it's a question of looking at a glass half empty and half full. The poverty side is there, but there is also a great deal of innovation, enterprise. Young people are doing, after getting education in India, are doing extremely well in advanced countries. They are now heading big corporations in the United States, for example. So I think that's another part of the story we ought to look at. And I think poverty could be established if India were to grow at, say, 10% per year for 10 years, which is within striking distance. And that's what we are aiming at just now.
One of the other criticisms we heard from Mr. Iyer, the Indian opposition politician, was that these policies announced by the government, getting foreign direct investment to boost growth, are classic neoliberal policies. And I mean, it's been pointed out by the IMF that these are the kinds of policies that increase inequality in a country. Is that a valid criticism?
Well, it's the inequalities increase if you do not simultaneously increase the two things. One, the agricultural sector, where a good number of the poor people live, and they will be left out in these measures, certainly. And therefore, we need a special focus, and I can tell you the Prime Minister has got that very much on his mind. And the second thing is that the small and medium industries, actually due to certain policies which, in my opinion, were misplaced, which is now being rectified, and that is the high interest, raising of the interest rates to control inflation, ended up making many of our small and medium industries sick. And some of them closed down, and then they couldn't pay back their loans, so the banks also had a lot of unpaid loans. That's because the small and medium industries actually provide bulk of the semi-skilled employment in our country. And it was very unfortunate that they had to face such a high cost of capital and had to suffer. But now that will be rectified. And along with these measures on technology, upgradation, and innovation, I think we'll have a much more balanced growth.
What are foreign investors expected to make of the fact that the very respected chief of the Indian Central Bank has announced that he will not be running for another term when his term ends in September? What are we to make of that?
Well, whether he decided or the government decided that he would only get one term, I don't know the actual position. But I was a critic because of his policies, which was one-dimensional. See, if I can just take you back a little to the American Depression of 1930. In 1926, the economists argued that if unemployment has to be removed, then the wage rates have to come down, because without the wage rates coming down, employment will not increase. But what happened is when they brought the wages down, the purchasing power also went down, and therefore the demand went down, and there was a further depression, and ultimately United States and European countries landed squarely into one of the most massive depressions that the world had seen. So economics is it's a much more general equilibrium system, and the Reserve Bank governor was plugging this line that all you have to do to control inflation is to raise interest rates. And therefore, and he was not listening to any advice from anybody. And therefore, this continued policy of his to raise interest rates has harmed our Indian economy, has put the small and medium industries completely out of business. And therefore, people like me had urged the Prime Minister not to extend his term, and which is what I think happened in the end.
The World Bank has an index in which it measures the ease of doing business in another country. India currently ranks 130 on that index. Why has it been so tough on business?
Well, it's still the legacy of the Soviet system, the colonial system. Bureaucrats love holding on to power. So it's a historical legacy. It has to be corrected. But if you look at the trend of ease of doing business, it's vastly improved. And I think more and more as years go by, we will move up quite rapidly amongst the developed countries' ease of doing business.
Mr. Subramanian Swamy, thanks for joining us, sir.